evening, everybody. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. I'm going to say this a couple times tonight, but you guys will get the first peek. Tonight is the very first time in the history of Unpolished that we are live streaming the event. Woo! So we want to thank our friends Valera Studios and my man Vern back there in the back. Thank them. Give them a nice round of applause. They got us set up tonight. So if you have a phone that's smart, get that out. And if you don't already follow Unpolished Cincy on Facebook, go ahead and like that page and share the stream with your friends. That would be great. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes, so hang tight, okay? All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Unpolished tonight. I'm thrilled that you're here. If you don't know me, my name's James Clare. I am on this team at Ocean and Unpolished. And if I don't know you, absolutely come up to me in the networking hour. I'd love to meet you. So what is Unpolished? What is Ocean? What do we do around here? What we do is we increase the awareness of God in the marketplace. So we do that in a few different ways, and we've got a couple big events coming up that help with that. So the first one, our high-tech startup program, Ocean, has its demo day on April 27th. And I'm thrilled to say that the event is sold out, which is awesome, right? So this is the first year we're going to have that at Crossroads Uptown, and it's going to be amazing. So you guys can all see it. If you haven't already RSVP'd with your ticket, you can still see it's oceanaccelerator.com/live. It's at 4 o'clock this year. The next one you're probably really familiar with is the Unpolished Conference. It's coming up September 14th and 15th. You're going to hear from speakers that are from around the nation, and as well, you're going to have access to some awesome breakout sessions. We'll feature all that stuff on unpolishedconference.com. Tickets go live in the beginning of May. So, tonight's going to be an awesome night. You're going to hear from 3 speakers who are going to stir some things up in you. You might feel inspired. There might be some points of tension in your life or in your business. You may be thinking about team members. You may be thinking about the community. And what I want to encourage you to do is you have access to this awesome prayer team. Guys, can you go ahead and stand the prayer team from Crossroads? So they're right here in front. So they're going to be available immediately after the program, right here in front of the stage. I'm going to join them before I head to the networking night. I encourage you to join with me. Cool? All right. I'll get out of your way. I'm going to talk to you guys later tonight, but first off, we're going to kick the tires and light the fires. But before we do that, let's invite God into the room. God, you deserve a praise and applause. Amen. Lord, thanks for bringing these people here tonight. I ask that you bless them with an incredible observation, that you move them, that you bring to light something that's been hiding in them, and that tonight is the first step. Bless our speakers and bless our community time together immediately following the event. Praise everything in your name. Amen. All right, everybody give it up. Kevin Raines.
Hi, I'm Kevin. It's awesome to be here. I am actually a little bit nervous tonight, which is weird because I do public speaking all the time, and as you're about to hear in a minute, I was a pastor for a while, and I spoke every week for the longest time, and I still speak almost every week in front of crowds. So I've been asking myself, why do I feel nervous tonight? And I think it's because you all are my people. People who are exploring the intersection of faith and entrepreneurship. That's my people. So I am super glad to be here. I hope I can add something of value tonight. I'll try to get over my nervousness. My wife is here, and she said to just imagine her in her underwear and that would help me. That could actually create something else to be uncomfortable for me. And you. It's always good to start with an erection joke, right? Hello, Facebook Live. There's your erection joke out of the gate. You're welcome. Who here has ever felt like a failure? Who here regularly feels like a failure? I often feel like a failure. The reason I believe I feel like a failure is because I was supposed to be doing something else with my life at this point. I felt called to ministry as a teenager, and I had the opportunity to be in ministry, to pastor a church, and to do mission work all over the world, basically from the time I was in college until the time I was 40. And when I say ministry, I mean professional ministry, people who get paid to be Christians. That was me. I was actually a pastor of a small church near here in Norwood called Vineyard Central from about the age of 25 until I was 40 years old. So I know what it means to be involved in the day-to-day operation of a small church. Somewhere along the line, when I was the age of 33, I'm 47, just for context, around the age of 33, my dad invited me back into the family business of auto body repair. We fix wrecked cars. It's something he's done for a number of years, since the early 1970s, and I'll tell you a little bit about that towards the end. But the business was in a moment of real crisis, and it was a moment when I needed the income, frankly. My church budget was not growing, but my family was. So it was a time when his request and my need kind of met in a really powerful way, and I did rejoin the family business. But after about a year of working in the shop with my father, we realized that there was too much leadership in that shop, which is a nice way of saying we were constantly at each other's throat. So Dad very graciously gave me a loan to be the down payment on a much larger loan that a bank gave me, and I opened up my own shop in Norwood called Center City Collision. And that shop thrived for a long time. It was only because Dad helped me get set up. I was able to pay him back after about 10 years. But something weird started to happen. I was still deeply involved in the life of the church and the ministry, and also running my business at the same time. And the thing that's weird that happened for me was the business started to grow in ways that I did not expect. And it grew in ways that were disproportionate to the amount of effort that I was putting into it. This actually sent me into grief. It's not the right slide. They didn't get my grief slide. Okay, that's all right. So grief, the stages of grief begin with denial. And at each stage along the way, there's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I experienced each one of those because, you see, I didn't want my business to grow. I wanted my church to grow. I wanted my ministry to grow. I believed that that's what God had called me to. And in error, I believed that that was a much higher calling than anything else in the world. I didn't want to be a greedy, capitalistic entrepreneur. I wanted to be a pastor in an urban neighborhood, living just barely above the poverty line, raising my family, and suffering for Jesus. That's the noble life. It took me a while to figure out that that is not the noble life. And I went through all those stages from denial all the way to acceptance. One of the stages along the way, I don't have time to talk about each one, but at each stage, I believe God brought me a mentor who spoke a very specific word or phrase into my life that helped me move really deeper into the process of grief, which ultimately helped me get through it. But that bargaining stage was really a big one for me. There was a moment in time when I was leading my business full-time. I was still totally responsible for the church's leadership. We were adopting, my wife and I and our 2 kids, were adopting a 3rd child from Colombia. They're all pictured there. And that was a 2-year process. It took a lot of time and a lot of effort. Ultimately, she did join our family. She's the one on the far left of the photo. And I was also pursuing a doctorate degree. So those 4 things, each one of those things could have been a full-time gig, really. I was trying to do all of those things at once. And the bargaining for me is, God, if you will just help me to do all of this, I will continue to serve you. And then I bargained with myself. If I could just sleep a little bit less or a lot less, maybe there's a way I could figure out how to accomplish all those things. And God brought me a mentor named Ed Bainski. Isn't that a great name for a business mentor, by the way? Bainski. Great business mentor. And Ed said, there's an old proverb that says, chase 2 rabbits, catch none. I'm not sure if that's a Russian proverb or a Chinese proverb, but it sure seemed true in that moment, that I was trying to chase 2 rabbits at the same time. I was going to end up with exactly nothing. My dad likes to say, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So that led into some depression, landed in counseling, ultimately learned to accept the fact that I am an entrepreneur. But it took me a long time to be comfortable with the fact that God had called me to be an entrepreneur. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't just because I happened to get lucky and my business was growing, but that he was actually calling me and drawing me to be an entrepreneur. And God doesn't waste anything. When God prepares somebody, he uses everything that he's given up to that point for his good purposes. There's a saying in ministry that we comfort the afflicted and we afflict the comfortable. That applies to business too, doesn't it? If there are people in your sphere, in your business, in your startup, whatever phase you're in, if they're comfortable, sometimes they need that little pat on the butt. If they're uncomfortable, they need to be comforted. So lessons like that were a big part of me developing the culture within my business. Did I just hit puberty? Because my voice dropped. Once again, my wife will be stoked, but... So this is what it looks like when a pastor runs a business, at least when I start to really grapple and grasp what I've been called to do. We put care at the center. I'm trying to run my body shops with one singular value, and that's the value of care, and it gets expressed in a bunch of different ways, 4 of which are up there. Are you all familiar with Simon Sinek's book or video, Start With Why? Good. If you're not, leave here tonight before Joe speaks. You can just leave. He won't care. And check out the video by Simon Sinek. It was a TED Talk that has gotten thousands and thousands of views. But when I look at this slide and I think about our culture, I think about Simon has these kind of three rings, and the outer ring is the what. It's the most obvious thing that we do in any business, your business, my business. The what is always the most obvious. The what for me is I fix wrecked cars. And then he moves to this next ring, which is the how. And that's represented for me in that kind of second area. We care for our customers. So how you do your business, you're kind of moving closer into the middle here. And for us, that involves a lot of empathy. Again, things that I've learned in ministry, to be empathetic and deeply care for the customers that come to me. But really, it's the why that matters the most. And the why is that bullseye right in the middle. And that's the last two sections there. Caring for my team and caring for the neighborhoods that God calls us into with our business. All right, can't advance the slide. Thank you. So that's a picture of us trying to care for our team. The person at the head of the table is the general manager of our Norwood location. And the original shop, which was called Center City Collision, it's now called CarStar. But that's John. He was also a pastor of a church in northern Kentucky before I hired him. And the way we express care through this is we have basically a family meal once a month with our entire team. So we invite everybody over to our home, and John prepares a big meal once a month and then serves that meal. So again, we're trying to embed that culture of care and service. And we always go around the table and ask the guys to say something positive. We call it a positive focus. And again, these are blue-collar guys. They're not used to speaking. They're not used to sharing their heart. So when we started this a few years ago, it was like pulling teeth to get them to say anything. And I remember the first time somebody said something when we shared a positive focus or asked for a positive focus, one guy raised his hand and said, "My girlfriend's not pregnant." I'm like, you know what? That's a winner. Let's clap for that. Like, you know. So we started slow. And now everybody comes prepared to share something positive that's happening in their personal life. We also do what's called attaboys or attagirls. And we go around the circle and everybody shares something that they saw somebody else do right. So we talk about catching people doing things right. Yeah, there it is. Another part of our why is caring for the neighborhoods that we serve in. This is a rugby team that we helped start with one of my neighbors, who's a firefighter. His name's Joshua Hanauer. And Slocum, are you here tonight? There's Slocum. He's in this picture, the big guy on the far right. And he's one of the coaches as well. This program started with just a few $100s a month and kind of buying them some shirts and kind of helping them buy some rugby balls and get started with this rugby team. But ultimately, it's not about rugby. It's about mentoring young men and helping them become who God's created them to be. Last year, I forget the exact number, but there's actually been full scholarships that have been attained through this program. And it started many years ago through, again, a very small amount of money and just the dedication of my friend Joshua, who's a firefighter full-time and just does this on the side. Oh, Captain, my captain. That's my dad. He's the one who started our family business, and I'm going to kind of end with this. I was looking at the website for CityLink and realized when I saw the different names, there was a page on CityLink. It's a nonprofit in downtown Cincinnati. I was looking on their website, and they had a page called the 10 Poorest Neighborhoods in Cincinnati, and I recognized 3 of them. One is where my dad lived before he got married. One is where he met my mom. And the third is where I was born and raised for the first 6 years of my life. So Dad, when we were living in that fairly impoverished neighborhood of South Fairmount, he comes from a family that's very broken. A lot of alcoholism, a lot of abuse, sexual abuse, the whole 9 yards. And the reason I put this up there is because when I began this talk tonight, I was talking about, does God have a purpose for the entrepreneur? And I can say, after my years of being an entrepreneur and then reflecting on what my dad has accomplished before me, being an entrepreneur is a very noble calling. It literally lifted my family out of poverty and changed the course of our family's trajectory for generations to come. And it started right here. He didn't know one thing about how to fix cars. He bought this book in 1971, opened it up, had a few hand tools, and taught himself how to fix cars from a book. Out of that has then flowed his shop, helped me get my shop set up. I bought a second location a couple years ago, and my sister Kelly, who I believe is here tonight, also owns a shop in Amelia. So this little tiny 2-car garage behind our house in South Fairmount is now 4 locations across the city doing several $1 million a year in revenue. So God has been really good to our family. Last slide, they asked me to throw some things up about marketing, just a couple quick ideas for you to kind of walk out of here with, some takeaways. Marketing is relational. I encourage you to cultivate referral partners. My first referral partner was a Volkswagen dealership. When I bought Center City Collision, there was a Volkswagen dealership across the street. I knew they were in touch with hundreds and hundreds of customers. They got to my customers before I did, because they sold them cars and they serviced their cars, and people only wreck their cars typically about once every 5 years, unless you're a really bad driver, then a little more frequently, and we do have frequent flyer miles for people like that. The 10th one's free. But that dealership, I couldn't break through and get them to send us much work until we think it was a drunk student from a local college close to Norwood, I won't mention the name, ran across the hoods of 8 brand new Volkswagens. So that allowed us the opportunity to fix 4 of those. At the time, I was only doing 10 cars a month. I couldn't handle all 8 at once. So they gave me 4 and gave another shop 4. We did ours well. The color matched. We detailed the cars, got them back quickly, and from that day on, we've gotten several $100,000 a year in revenue from just that one referral partner, and it started because of just a small break like that. So I encourage you to cultivate referral partners. Secondly, highlight what makes you different, your unique selling proposition, your USP. What makes you unique? For my dad, when he started, it was speed. He was super fast. He had business cards printed up that said, collision repair in 1 day. And he put that on a card and distributed it all over the west side of town, and that's how he gained his reputation. For me, I believe it's going to be the culture of care that sets us apart from other body shops, because there are hundreds of body shops. So you have to find what makes you different and highlight that at every turn. And the last thing is, your culture ultimately is what carries your marketing. So develop a deep culture. God bless you.
All right. I'm back. How about that? Give him one more round of applause. That was phenomenal. Ryan, just so you know, there's a cup of water up here for you, if you need it, okay? Well, here we go. Bam. Guys, let me introduce our next speaker. This guy is, he's just awesome. Welcome, Ryan Berg.
I need direction on the clicker. Which way? Need a quick tutorial on the clicker. All right. 2 quick disclaimers in light of the work that we do. One, if I go hand in the pocket, that means I may be getting just a little bit teared up, so give me a moment. Second disclaimer, I have lost all filter in light of the work that we do. So I'm just going to ask your permission now if I share some things where you go, what? Just, I'll assume that that's okay. I'll assume that I can continue on. You see, the first time I actually stepped foot in a brothel, the smell of stale urine was so pungent that it literally knocked me back a step. And as I stepped in a little bit further, my eyes were adjusting to the darkness, and I noticed movement to kind of the sides. Huge rats just resting in leisure. And as I stepped in a little bit further, I came to a staircase, and the stairs were made out of wood, but they were worn smooth from all the traffic in and out. And as I started up those stairs, as I got close to the top of that staircase, I could start to hear the sound of abuse echoing off those walls. And if those walls could talk, as the saying goes, few of us could stomach the stories. You see, I had gone to this particular area as part of a work trip, but a few weeks prior to that trip, prior to leaving on that trip, I'd seen a little ticker line on CNN that made reference to 12 children being rescued from a brothel. I had never heard about sex trafficking before in my life, didn't know it existed, but the incongruency of the fact that it existed to the scale that it would show up on CNN, and the fact that it continued to exist with that much exposure just simply seemed incongruent to me. I thought, how in the world, if we know that this is happening, are we not mobilizing people to bring about change? And so as I stood on that front, that top step, I was there to try and understand, why is this happening? And as I stepped out onto that front step, it basically opened into a long corridor where there was just woman after woman lined up. And behind each of them was basically a closet-sized room with nothing more than a mattress and a pool curtain. And I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I was so naive. I'd seen a lot of things in terms of poverty as we had done some work around the world in different parts, but I had never seen this depth of inhumanity before. And as I started to try and engage in conversation with some of the women that stood, as I tried to share about the idea of hope and there being hope for a better day and hope for a better future, if I could be honest but very blunt, hope had been raped out of them years before. Hope doesn't exist in this place. This is a place where flesh is for sale. It's a place where few women enter by choice and some never leave until death. It's a wicked, nasty place. I left that place. It was about 7.5 years ago. And I left that place because I can. I have that choice. I'm not a slave. And when I got back here to the U.S., I started to talk to my wife about it, and I couldn't control the emotion. I didn't know what to do. Having seen slavery face to face, having looked into the eyes of lifeless women. And I didn't know what to do with it. And the faces were indelibly marked into my mind, and as my wife and I began to pray, Lord, what would you have us do? What do we do? In Proverbs 31:8, he says this, speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak for those who can't speak for themselves. So we decided to go back. We decided to try and figure out, what in the world does this mean for us? Is there anything that we can offer? Is there anything that we can contribute? Is there any voice that we can give to those who have been silenced? So we embedded in the area and we began to meet with multiple different people, multiple different organizations, to simply try and understand, why is this thriving? And who's doing what? And where are they doing it? And how are they doing it? We wanted to understand mission and visions and values and methods and constraints and all that stuff to try and figure out where are the gaps and can we contribute? Well, the reality is, as we continue to talk with all those different organizations, every single one of them, independent of each other, talked about the need for sustainable employment. Entrepreneurs doing what they do to create jobs for the need of these women. So we just asked a simple question, well, who's doing it? And in this particular city, virtually no one. And we understood why. And we're talking about taking some of the most traumatized people on the planet, most of whom are completely uneducated, the majority of whom have never operated a sewing machine, maybe not even seen one before, let alone some sort of higher education to become a lawyer or anything like that. We're talking about some of the most challenging people to employ to produce a product that is a high enough standard that it can compete in the open market in the West. You just thought, that's impossible. And yet we continue to wrestle with this reality. Aren't these women worth attempting the impossible? And isn't God the God of the impossible? So part of the challenge that we continue to wrestle with was this very idea of speaking for those who can't speak for themselves. And for us, as we continued to think through that and what that meant, for us it was absolute key. It was going to be messaging. Not marketing, but messaging. Because when you speak for someone, when you're the voice of another who can't speak for themselves, you carry with you a particular message on behalf of that person. That's messaging. And I want to suggest when we consider what it is that we're doing and how we put our message out there, there's a few things to consider that we were wrestling through when we thought about stepping into this whole thing. And that was simply this: a direct message as well as an indirect message. And for us, direct messaging had a lot to do with the idea of authenticity, consistency, and personality. The idea to truly be authentic, to truly and ultimately be who we are, or who the product is, or who the company is, without sensationalizing or without minimizing. In other words, we were going to be true to the existence of what these women were going through. We weren't going to shy away, even if it was a little bit unpalatable for our typical Western experience. It's real, and their voice needs to be heard. So we were going to be true and authentic to that message. But secondly, we also needed to be consistent. We need to be consistent with who we are and what we do and what we say. You see, if authenticity is going to move us to consistency, then it's going to be coming out of truly who we are or who our business is. And it's going to flow right into what we do and what we say. So from day one, if we were going to say we're going to value these women as image bearers of God with tremendous value, then we can't make a poor product that's just going to be some sort of pity purchase. That doesn't make sense. That's not consistent with the message that we want to carry forward for them. We want to make something that's of high value, that reflects the dignity that they could feel in producing it and having it sold. We want it to be consistent across the board, which is why we talked a lot about this idea that we would be product-driven and story-enhanced. And ultimately, it's got to be an aspect of personality. Why does it matter? You know, Kevin mentioned that as he was up here. Why does it matter? Why does your message matter? In other words, how do we connect it to the humanity of another? And for us, as we consider this idea, the reality of sex trafficking literally strips someone of what it is to be human. If we were designed with this idea of having healthy relationship and having voice and having influence, sex trafficking and repeated sexual abuse, more than anything I know, crushes those things. Healthy relationship, it crushes it to the point where it ultimately isolates. The idea of having voice is silenced. The idea of exercising some sort of influence gets rendered powerless. And so ultimately what we want to do in our message was to say we're going to truly connect this human to human. Because as we stepped into this reality of human trafficking, what we saw is that most people talked about statistics and numbers. And in the midst of the message, we lost the humanity. The humanity of each one of these women who have a face and a name, and Lord willing, a hope when we step into their need. So the idea was to connect personally, human to human. knowing that each one of us have gone through some of those things where we have felt silenced, powerless, isolated. And ultimately, when we considered where we're going to go with this sort of messaging, was this idea of the indirect message as well. And I want to suggest here's where we can really infuse some really neat kingdom values into what we do. All of us. Into what we do with our businesses, because this reality, it's the subtext to what we're communicating. It's ultimately helping to propose a certain way that people can see or relate to the world. And our subtext, without question, others matter. Others matter. And we can step into their needs and still experience life to the full. So as we considered these sort of needs that we were going to step into with messaging, we decided we're going to try and start a business to free and empower and employ these women. So we came up ultimately with this sort of model, and the idea was what we're going to do is we're going to press this sort of messaging into everything that we do. So in 2014, we launched the U.S. nonprofit. And then in 2015, we launched the Freedom Business. And then we actually purchased all the shares of the business by the nonprofit so we could operate the entire thing as one, with the idea that we would press into each aspect of what we're doing in terms of messaging. So we decided we're going to create these runs. Why? Because we needed to create a market first. To create the business, to push product into. So we created these runs with the idea that we're going to connect human to human. So in these runs, you run for a particular woman that we and our staff know who's still enslaved. You run to raise awareness of her need, to empathize with her daily struggle, and to raise funds to help go into the freedom process. Within the freedom process, what we do is we actually have artisans who are with us that also, now that their voice has been empowered, now that they're surrounded with healthy relationship, can exercise influence by going back into that particular red light area and begin to help draw out others and bring them into freedom. Which helps further that sort of empowerment process where they now have choice. They now have a voice. And that voice goes down into the very aspects of everything that we do within that business. In the production meetings, they've got a voice. They actually have notebooks where they can sketch out different design ideas and thoughts on what they think things should be implemented into both the production process as well as the design. And ultimately the employment part, where they, in the midst of everything that they're making, their name is on every product in some fashion. Dignified work to bring about freedom. And then ultimately that we push and market those products, if you could use that word marketing, here in the U.S. to a U.S. market that would buy a high quality product with an exceptional story. And the full loop circle we decided was essentially, okay, somebody runs in this Aruna run for someone who's still enslaved. They're going to receive a product made by women who have been set free as a result of previous runs. To prove out the whole loop. And by God's grace, He has done some exceptional things. I'll use a pseudonym for this young woman, Halima. About 4.5 years ago, I was in the middle of this particular brothel, and I'm inside of her little room, and we're having a conversation. And I started to talk about the idea of hope. I started to talk about the idea of what could be, and I spent some time praying with Halima. 4.5 years pass. And just on this past trip, as we're in the production unit, I'm in our production unit with some of our girls, and we kind of pull them in, the new girls, and we typically talk about how the business was made for them, but it'll continue to grow by them. And usually by that time, they've got great relationship with our aftercare specialist, and we're going back and forth. I didn't recognize Halima. And she's sitting there quiet, and she's staring at the floor. And our aftercare specialist says, do you have anything else to share? Anything else that you would want to share to all the girls? And Halima sat up, looked me in the eye, and she started talking. And she got louder and louder, and she started to cry. And I thought, oh no, is there a need that we have to meet here? And I looked to our aftercare specialist, and she said, Ryan, 4.5 years ago when you were in her room, and I didn't even remember her face. She said, you spoke about hope. You spoke about this place, and you spoke about the fact that she mattered. And she said, now that she's sitting in this place, having experienced what she's experiencing, she believes that hope does exist. And she believes that she does matter. And the only reason Halima was sitting in that room that day is because of Sephora. You see, I went in and I spent a little bit of time with Halima and shared a little bit, but Sephora, one of our girls, continued to go in to pursue Halima because others matter. And Sephora understood that. So it's fun to see. We've seen some really fun things happen. They put together a little video. Sorry, I was going to try and play it on mute. But they put together a little video for you guys to see. They wanted to kind of share a message, but it ended up just turning into kind of a big laugh fest because they couldn't quite keep it together. So the great joy for us is simply this. We're seeing God do what only God can do in freeing, empowering, and employing some of these women. So my direct message to you, not so subtle, join with us. Buy the stuff. We're launching the new site in about a month, and it's real nice. And the girls are really excited to share it with you. But also run with us, literally. We've got runs all across the U.S., and we've got our Cincinnati Aruna run coming up May 20th, right down at the Freedom Center, where you actually run for a particular woman by name. My indirect message to you, not so indirect, speak up for those who can't speak for themselves, because others matter. Thank you.
All right, one more time. Great job. That was awesome. That was awesome. So before I introduce our last speaker, I've got an exciting announcement to make. So last year, we announced we were going to introduce Unpolished training, which is a 9-week training program for you guys. And I'm thrilled to say that next Wednesday, 15 of your fellow small business owners are going to go through that training. How awesome is that? How awesome is that? If you're not part of that first cohort, don't worry. In 9 weeks, we're going to do another one. Okay? So, applications for that will open in about a month. So at the end of the night, I'll tell you how you can stay tuned to our news. That's how you'll know when applications open. But that's a huge deal. That's an incredible feat, and I'm thrilled to see those entrepreneurs go through that journey. Last speaker of the night, Mr. Joe Boyd. Come on up.
Hey. Just going to picture Kevin's wife in her underwear. All right. I'm not nervous now. I am super excited to be here with you. My buddy Scott asked me to come and share, Scott Weiss, and he said, talk about marketing in your story. And so I'm going to attempt to do those things. I think marketing is trying to get people to do something, right? It's trying to get people to make a decision, and hopefully a decision that you would find beneficial. And if we're good people, I was a producer in LA for a while, so I can talk about the opposite, but if we're good people, then we are selling something that's helpful. I thought back through all the major decisions I make in my life, and the earliest, biggest decision that I made, which I'm sure I wouldn't be standing here right now had I made a different decision, is when I was just 8 years old. I was an only child. I still am. That was not my decision. but other people decided that for me. And when I was 8 years old, we lived in Russell, Kentucky. Thank you. So, and the town preacher came to our house. We were not going to church because we were hell-bound sinners. And the preacher came. His name was Omar, but he went by Pokey, which would not work anymore. But his name was Pokey Miller. And a nice guy. Pokey came to our house. He talked to my parents first. And my parents said, hey, we're going to start going to church. And then he talked to me, and it went something like this. He said, Joey, that's what I went by back then. He said, Joey, when you die, you're going to go one of two places. And I said, all right, I'm only 8. I haven't thought through this. Tell me what's up, Pokey. And he said, if you love Jesus and if you give your heart to Jesus and if you, in my particular denomination, if you pray and if you're baptized, then you will go to heaven. And heaven is a great place. That's all anyone really knows about it, by the way. Heaven's a great place. I was like, okay. And he said, if you don't, say this particular prayer and get baptized on a Sunday morning, you go to a place called hell. And that's where you literally burn for all eternity. Would you like to go to heaven or hell, Joey? And I said, well, Pokey, you seem like an upstanding guy. And I don't know why you lie to me. I still believed in adults at that time. And I said, I would prefer heaven. And he said, great. Pray the prayer. Boom. Got wet the next Sunday, and I was good to go. That decision that I made was based in a story. Every decision we make is based in a story. And the story that Pokey told me I believed. As I got older, I became more cynical. And I didn't believe every story that was told to me, but still every decision I made was based in a story. And that first big decision I made was the best decision I ever made in my life. It shaped absolutely everything good in my life came because I made that decision to follow Jesus. And it also, in the same moment, gave me so much freaking baggage and so much angst with the institutional church and with literalism and all sorts of things that I'm not going to talk about right now, that it became my demon to wrestle. And it all started with a decision when I was 8 years old. And I'd do it again. Because that was the story I most earnestly believed at the time. When I was 15, we had moved to Columbus, Ohio. Again, not my decision. But I started going to a church, and this particular church was in the same denomination as the first one. And they invented a second sort of decision you could make, which was to commit yourself to what they called full-time vocational ministry. Anyone else I went to a thing called a Christ in Youth Conference. Anyone from this background? Yeah. So it's the Christian churches of Christ. They do this youth thing. And they do the altar call. And in the altar call, you can come forward if you want to give your life to Jesus. I did that when I was 8, so I got nothing to do during the altar call. But then they said, or if you've already done that, you can come forward while other people are coming forward to be saved and go to heaven. You can come forward and commit your life to full-time vocational Christian service. And all I knew was I was a super good Christian. I got to do this. And I went forward at 15 and committed to, think about those words, full-time, vocational, Christian service. I took it very seriously. So seriously that when my dad said, hey, what are you going to minor in college in case this ministry thing doesn't work out? I remember saying, I'm going to minor in nothing. I committed myself to full-time vocational Christian ministry. And if I do anything else, it's a sin. I made a commitment. And that stuck with me for a while, but I made that decision based on the story I believed at the time, and the story I believed at the time, which was true, was that God loved me, and the best thing that ever happened to me was finding Jesus. Why would not I want to devote my life to helping others find Jesus? I had no story or construct that you could possibly do it in your spare time or with a, quote, real job. So I gave myself to that. The time came to make a decision about where to go to college, and I was offered a full ride to a place called Milligan College in Tennessee. And it's a great school, really is. It's just in Tennessee. And I went and visited a couple times, and I remember telling my parents right before I was going to go, like, I don't want to live in Tennessee. I had already escaped Kentucky, and I enjoyed living in Columbus. And I said, I want to go to like a city, and some of my friends are going to Cincinnati Christian University, and I decided to go there. I made that decision based on the story I believed at the time, which is cities are better than not cities. And that, by the way, has never changed in my opinion. And so I moved to Cincinnati and met a couple of years in a girl whom I decided instantly should be my wife. And that was the decision I made based on the story I was living in at the time, which was, this girl's awesome, and I got to convince her before she realizes how awesome she is. And just, you know, it's Bible college, so if you're not married by 19, there's something wrong. But I convinced her, and she married me. And that was the second best decision I've ever made since I said finding Jesus was the best one and not the second worst one. Like, she has shaped my life more than any other human being. I love her. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Deb, one person's excited that I love you. I decided that I wanted to start a church. I made that decision based on the story I believed at the time, which is that starting a new church would be the best way to take the gospel to a place that didn't have it. And I also decided that Las Vegas didn't have the gospel, so I decided for Debbie and I to get married and move to Las Vegas and start a church there. And we had early success. The church grew really fast from 0 to 600 in a couple of years. And it was very performance-based. And in some ways, when I come into Crossroads every time, I think, oh, this is what might have happened in Vegas if I hadn't blown up my church. Like, it has a similar, it would have evolved to something very much like this as it ultimately just died, but it could have evolved to something like this. And then I just was, I went to visit some friends of mine who actually live in Cincinnati, and they lived in community. Oh, it was Kevin who spoke earlier, and his wife Tracy, and we came and visited their community, and they were doing real church, is how we felt like it, because nobody came, so it had to be holy, right? So we're like, there's just 12 of them, and they go around their neighborhood and love poor people, and all we do is comedy and rock and roll. Like, I'm going to go back to Vegas, and we're going to do real church like Kevin and Tracy. And we tried it, and everybody left. And that was, thank you. So then I was suddenly, my whole life trained to be a pastor without a church because I sort of blew it up. And we said, don't come to church on Sunday morning, just go to house churches. That's where real church happens. And they all just went to other churches on Sunday morning. And then my wife had given me improv classes for fun. The second city was in Vegas, and I'd always deep down wanted to do comedy, and she gave me those classes. And I was in Las Vegas with a theology degree and no minor. And I decided what I should obviously do is go into comedy. The only other option literally was performing weddings at casinos, and I got fired from the Luxor 3 days in for missing a wedding. True story. Just so you know, time-wise, when I get to the slides, it's almost done. So that's the decision I made based on the story at the time. The story at the time I was telling myself is the institutional church is sort of BS. And I found the real church, and the real church doesn't need pastors, and it doesn't need money, and it doesn't need buildings. It just needs people with real jobs, loving Jesus and changing their communities. I'm going to go get a real job. So I became a comedian and worked for 2.5 years, 6 nights a week at the Rio Casino in a show called Tony and Tina's Wedding. I pretended to be drunk every night for 2.5 years and did improv with the Second City. And I decided this is going great. We need to move to LA because obviously God is calling me now to change the entertainment industry and be a bastion of hope in that crooked world. And I went, and things went okay. You probably recognize me from my role as the doorman on General Hospital. But the decision we made at the time just felt like the right decision. It just felt like, then the story we believed was, this is what God's doing. He's going to have my version of a real job, which is acting and producing. 2.5 years into LA, the Vineyard Church here in Cincinnati called and asked me to be a pastor again. I hadn't done that for 8 years. And I said no, and then they called back, and I said yes. That's a very short version of that story. And almost overnight, we went back into church world. Jim Cochran's here. He's one of the people who hired me. I don't know, Jim, I don't know if you knew this. I hadn't gone to church for like 5 years when you guys hired me to be a pastor. So, but I'd gone a lot of years before that, and I knew how it worked. And I was immediately a teaching pastor, at the second biggest church in town. I don't remember the name of the biggest one, but and I was teaching to thousands, low thousands, not high thousands of people. And then it just felt like the right decision to make. Like I tried the whole thing, but ultimately I did commit to full-time vocational service, right? So now I'm back finally. And then about 5 years, 3 or 4 years, 5 years into that, I was presented with the opportunity to pursue the senior pastor position because Dave Workman was resigning, retiring. And I don't want to assume I would have got that position, but I was presented with the opportunity to see if I wanted it. And I said, I do, I want to do that. And I drove home, pulled over, and threw up. Not because the Vineyard's not a great church. It is. And not because I wouldn't have been good at it. I could have done it. I just remember driving home thinking, I'm going to ask for 6 weeks vacation. Because I can't do this. Can't do this it's just not me. I came back the next day and asked that I would not be considered. And in that meeting, I accidentally said, and I don't want the job I have now either. But that was the decision I made based on the story I was telling myself at the time. I couldn't imagine staying there and working for someone else after I had that job in my mind for 8 hours. So I said, what I'd like to do is just go make movies. And so I did that. It felt like the right decision based on the story I believed at the time. And we started Rebel Pilgrim Creative Agency. Actually, it was just called Rebel Pilgrim Productions back then. We started with a plan to make 3 movies a year. We made 1 movie in 3 years. And then it became time to shift our focus. And over the last, we celebrate our 5th anniversary as a company. We made it 5 years, May 1st, which is awesome, which is really hard for startups to last that long, so that's great. And as you've just heard, virtually impossible for me to do the same thing for 5 years. So it's a huge deal. And we, in essence, help people market. We don't always position ourselves as a marketing firm, but when we shifted away from movies, we knew we were storytellers, so we just began helping companies and organizations tell their story. If we could be completely honest, we would say we're a story company, but if you've ever tried to start an elevator pitch based on what do, we sell stories, it's weird conversation. So you got to find a way to talk about it. But some of the things we deeply believe is that every decision people make is emotional. That's the reason I told you that long story, that and Scott told me to. And I'm a logical person. Doesn't mean I'm smart. I am, but saying I'm logical doesn't mean I'm smart. I'm an INTP on the Myers-Briggs, which is the best one. It's only 2% of the population, whatever. But the T is the thinker, and I process everything through my head. And my wife is an F, and she's a feeler. And my example is I always say if someone ran in this room like bleeding and crying, my wife would run and do something. And I would stand up here, and this is what would happen. Why is someone interrupting me? I know I'm going long, and now I'm going to go longer. And what's her problem? Oh, she's hurt. Oh, that's too bad. I hate it when people get hurt. Maybe someone should help her. Maybe I should now think about walking and taking a step towards. So I would get there eventually if no one else was here. But I process everything head first. And so when I was first confronted with this actually scientific fact, if you don't believe this, you don't believe science. It's a whole other topic. Every decision we make is emotional. There have been scientific studies done of people with brain injuries that can no longer access their emotions. Very famous studies of them just trying to decide if they want a chicken sandwich or a turkey sandwich. And they will, in detail, tell you exactly what chicken tastes like and what turkey tastes like and all the reasons why they should choose turkey or should choose chicken, but they go crazy. They can't decide. Because ultimately, the thing that triggers every decision is our emotion, and we use our logic to back it up so we feel good about ourselves. But always, every single decision people make is emotional. And story creates emotion. Nothing creates emotion except story. Data does not create emotion. When you listen to Ryan's stories, they create emotion. If I told you, made up some number, that in Cambodia right now there's 12,000 girls staying in a brothel and we got to go help them. There are very few people in this room actually who are creative enough to make that a story. It's just a number. And one of the mistakes, by the way, we see people making in marketing all the time is to bombard their clients and customers and potential customers with data. People don't make decisions based on data. Even really smart, logical people base decisions on how smart and logical they think themselves to be. That's the emotion. They make decisions based on emotion. They use data to back it up. And only story creates emotion. And story has a DNA. Story is a thing. It's not just a word. It's like stories have a way that they are built. This is Joseph Campbell. Some of you may know Joseph Campbell. He wrote a book called The Power of Myth and The Hero with 1,000 Faces. He was a famous mythologist. How many of you have heard of Campbell, just by the way? Okay, maybe half or so. His famous PBS series that I would encourage you to watch is actually he's much more understandable on PBS than his books. But he studied every single story that's been told, every myth, every religion, and what he realized is that story has a DNA. All great stories are the journey of a hero. And the hero wants a treasure. The hero is looking for something to fulfill their life. Oftentimes the hero, what the hero needs isn't exactly what they want at the beginning of a story, but there's always something that will propel this hero or heroine on a journey. And they walk towards their treasure only to be encountered by a dragon, something that is trying to stop them from getting their treasure. It's the one thing they have to slay to get what they want in life. And the problem is they don't have the tool to beat the dragon. If they did, it would be a super fast, boring story. And so they start the journey for their treasure, but the only way they can get there is to beat the dragon. And they get to a point where they can't do anything until a mentor comes along. And the mentor takes them in. The mentor was once a hero themselves. And the mentor gives the hero a sword. Oftentimes, literally a sword, like Excalibur, literally. But the sword always represents a greater power at force in the particular universe or mythic world that the heroine is living in. This works for every great story that's ever been told. It's built in your DNA. You can't get away from it. And when you walk out of a movie and say, that movie sucked, it didn't do that. It cheated you somewhere. The greatest movie ever made has a hero. Young farm boy in Tatooine. And this hero has a treasure that he wants. What he wants is a family. He's an orphan. And by the way, an amazing amount of hero stories start with orphans. Almost every superhero story is an orphan. Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, all lose their parents. Every Disney movie kills the mom. Scene one, right? So the hero is just a normal guy, and all he wants is a treasure of a family, a community, and all he's got are his aunt and uncle, and then the Empire comes in and fries Uncle Owen, and he's got nothing. And so he goes on this great adventure, leaves Tatooine to find this treasure that he wants. And he has to encounter a dragon which is this villain, this Darth Vader. George Lucas wrote Star Wars based directly on Joseph Campbell's writings, and there's some deep things. And you remember the scene where, we all know this, right? The scene where Luke goes into the cave with Yoda, and he has to fight Darth Vader, but it's not really Darth Vader, and then the mask comes off, and it's Luke himself. Ultimately what the hero will find is the dragon is their shadow self. It's that part of them that they have to battle and kill. But a mentor always comes along, Obi-Wan, old Ben Kenobi. And what's he give him? A sword. A literal sword. But what he really gives him is the Force. This works for Harry Potter. It works for, SpongeBob. This is in our DNA. By the way, it's deep in the DNA of our faith. There are two ways to look at this. Campbell would say, he was an agnostic. He would say that all religions come out of this embedded story that's in us, and these are all just different ways of telling that story. You might come to believe that God put the story in us, and that Jesus as the Christ became the ultimate realization of that story, and so all these stories are just another way of us trying to tell the story of God. Moses is like a clear example, just quickly. Moses is the hero. His treasure is that he wants justice for his people. Remember, when he's 40 years old, he sees an Egyptian beating an Israelite, and he kills the Egyptian. He does that because he wants to protect his own people. But now he has to go on the run because he's a felon. And he's never going to get this treasure he really wants, which is for his people to be free. So he goes and he hides for 40 years, and he has a kid or two, and he watches a bunch of sheep, and he sees a burning bush. And the dragon that awaits him is Pharaoh. And if you make a movie about it, they have to be best friends and brothers, whatever. But the point is, it's the most powerful man in the universe, his known world. It's going to stop him from doing this. And Moses can't do it. He is a convicted felon living on a mountain smelling like sheep. He's 80 years old. He doesn't have any superpowers. He doesn't talk well. And then this bush appears. And here's one of the great things, side theological note. Almost every single hero story in our scriptures, Hebrew scriptures and Christian scriptures, God himself is the mentor. We ought to wrestle with the reality that as Christians, we have a mentor God. Very rarely, there's like the David Nathan story. There's a couple stories where the Jedi Knight comes in, but it's almost always God, or in the New Testament, Jesus. God comes in, and what does he give Moses? A literal sword, right? A stick. A staff. I mean, he already had the staff, but he put the magic in the staff. He put the mystery in the staff, and he gave him the power of God, power of the Holy Spirit. So marketing, and I know this is a little deep, but every time we try to get somebody to make some decision, it's always based in an emotion, and story has a DNA, and they can only access emotion through their DNA. So every time you try to sell somebody something or get somebody to do something, whether it's for their own good or not, they're running this through their head without knowing it. They are a hero, and they're looking for a treasure, and they are searching desperately for a mentor. And the number one mistake that people make, in my personal opinion, we do a lot of consulting around this at Rebel, is brands constantly, maybe accidentally, think they're the hero. And you're not the hero. You're the mentor. And when you begin thinking of yourself as the hero, then your commercials look a lot like, we're great, we're great, we're great. Like every radio spot ever, right? But when you can begin to see yourself as a mentor and your heroes out there, and all you have to do is give them the tool they need to defeat their dragon, to get what they really want, things start to change. So my definition of marketing is telling the right story to the right people in the right way at the right time. It's just sometimes hard to get all those right. But that's what we try to do at our place at Rebel. And just wanted to close with this. We talked about the Simon Sinek talk, and encourage you to watch that if you hadn't. This was not planned, but the other guys mentioned it. The what, the how, the why. And like what we do is consulting, and we make a bunch of videos. How we do it is, we have our own ways of doing storytelling. But why we do what we do at Rebel has been true since day one, even when we were making movies, is to spark hope and action in the world. Hope and action. And we are seen as storytellers, and we are, but that's what we do. Why we do it is because of the gospel, and that we can tap into this story, whether we're selling chiclets or an amazing nonprofit. There is a way to bring hope and action into the world in what you do every day. Cool? All right.
Yeah, of course, thanks. All right, guys, let's give them one more round of applause. That was sweet. All right, so got one more surprise for you, and then we'll start connecting. But one thing that we want to do is we want to help. There are hundreds of you in here, and it's awesome. And we are blessed with such an amazing community, and we want to bless you, and we want to make this place feel a little bit smaller. Networking can be a little weird. We talk to a lot of you guys. We do some research surveys. We do some interviews, and oftentimes we find that you really struggle to figure out, how do I approach somebody that I don't know in a dark room? Weird, so it happens everywhere we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to softball some conversation topics for you going forward at Unpolished, based on what our speakers talk about. How sweet is that, right? So right here you see in front of you, you saw a lot of these words thrown out by our speakers. They talked about vision, they talked about their values, and they told you how the market pays for what they do, which we call valuation. So tonight, what I want to challenge you to do, and you're going to get this cool little graphic here provided by our some awesome. Where's Corey Carlson at? Corey? There he is. Sorry, I'm like, Corey Carlson? So Corey Carlson's representing 5 capitals here tonight. They're our partner with the spiritual integration of our program through Ocean and Unpolished. We're going to send you a PDF of what I just showed you. And allows you to take that to your business, take that to your team, and talk about it with your team. What's your vision? That should be one sentence, right? What are your clear values? That shouldn't be 10. It should be 3 or 4 or 5. We have 5 at Ocean. So, and then valuation. How is the market going to pay for what you do? This is a great conversation starter when you take that home with your team. You'll get that in your email tonight. But you get to talk about this right now. If you're somebody in the room who you have no idea what your business really does, what's the vision for your business, find somebody who does. If you have no idea what your values are, or you may know what your values are, share them with someone who doesn't. Let's lead by example in this room tonight. Let's have an amazing time networking. I want to recognize a few people before I pray us out. 2 big ones. You'll see Unconventional Works. We actually have a large contingent of people who follow Unpolished in the city of Dayton, Ohio. And they're live streaming this event right now. How cool is that, right? Awesome. Unconventional Works is sponsoring the beer tonight, so we want to thank them for that. And in conjunction, Valar Studios, Valer, yeah, I got it that time. Valer Studios, they're making the live stream happen tonight. So let's give them a round of applause. It's awesome. And then obviously our other generous partners and sponsors. One last thing, our next event, 6 weeks from today, May 23rd, it's going to be right here in this room. You can follow us on Twitter, you can follow us on Facebook, and you can subscribe to our newsletter through Circle. Great? All right. I'm going to pray us out, and then we're going to have some fun. Okay? Father, what an awesome, awesome night. This community is blessed, and we're blessing others outside of this room. And I can feel your spirit in here, and your spirit in laughter and joy and smiling in all of these people attending here tonight. I ask that you bless the next hour that we have together, that we share in community with one another, we become vulnerable, we're authentic, and we move the ball forward in our businesses. Praise us in your name. Amen. Thank you, guys. Thanks so much.